Elias Mercer stared at the flickering screen inside his observation outpost, eyes narrowing as the emergency beacon pulsed red, a distress signal, sharp and irregular, coming from just outside the Labyrinthian expanse. That area was uncharted, unstable, and strictly marked no contact, but something about the signal's desperation pulled at him. Protocol told him to log it and stay put. His instinct said otherwise. The moment the alert confirmed a crash, he was already slipping into his exosuit, locking into his shuttle, and blasting off toward the shattered moon orbiting the gas giant below. The trip was short, but the atmosphere of the fractured moon made landing a violent gamble. Still, he pushed forward, the shuttle rattling under turbulence and static storms until he spotted a wrecked silver pod half buried in a crater. He landed rough and scrambled out with his medpack, expecting maybe a robot or a broken nav system, but what he found changed everything. Lying beside the pod, her body half crushed beneath a shard of alien metal, was a woman, though not like any woman he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, as if it held the sky inside it, her limbs longer, more elegant, and her eyes, huge and luminous, were barely open, fixed on him with a kind of silent plea. She was breathing, but weakly, and her arm was bent in a way that screamed pain. Elias worked fast, pulling debris away, talking gently, even though she likely didn't understand a word. The moon's air was thinning and a storm system was closing in fast. If he didn't get her aboard his shuttle in minutes, they'd both be trapped or worse. Lifting her wasn't easy. Her body felt light, fragile even, but every movement drew a sharp gasp from her lips, and Elias could feel time ticking like thunder behind him. He laid her carefully in the back of his shuttle, started the sequence, and braced for takeoff as lightning crashed in the distance. The engines screamed against the pull of the storm, but the ship lifted, barely, and soared away from the moon's death-trap grip. Safe for the moment, he checked her vitals readings, flickered and glitched, unfamiliar symbols flashing across his scanner, but her heartbeat, strange as it was, remained steady. Her eyes fluttered open again as he spoke softly, telling her she was safe, and she looked at him not with fear, but wonder. Hours later, back at the outpost, Elias laid her in the medbay and worked through night and exhaustion, using every scrap of medical knowledge and creativity he had. Her physiology was nothing like his training. Her veins carried a faint glow, her breath reacted strangely to oxygen levels, and her injuries didn't bleed in the way humans bled, but she responded to warmth, hydration, and the gentle sound of his voice. She began to heal. She never spoke, not yet, but her eyes followed him everywhere, studying him with curiosity, gratitude, and something else. There was a calmness to her presence, like a quiet before a great event, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue meant more than he could understand. Outside, space remained silent. Inside, he kept watch beside her, unaware that his act of mercy had already begun to echo far beyond his small world, through the stars, and into a civilization that would soon call him something he never expected, the Chosen. Elias didn't expect anything strange to happen when he decided to return the alien woman. He only wanted to bring her home, wherever that was, and quietly go back to his lonely routine on the outpost. But the moment her condition stabilized and she managed to whisper a sequence of sounds, coordinates, maybe, or a name, everything changed. His shuttle adjusted course, guided by her fragile voice, and the strange, glowing symbol she pressed into his ship's interface. As they approached the distant planet, what he saw took his breath away. Floating cities like petals on a massive blue and gold ocean, tall crystal spires that shimmered in orbit, and an atmosphere pulsing with color and light. As soon as they entered orbit, a fleet of elegant, living-looking ships surrounded them. Elias raised his hands, signaling peace, but the alien woman, now sitting upright, eyes full of strength, stepped forward and touched the console again. The ships backed off. They didn't fire. They bowed. When the shuttle landed on a wide, soft blue platform, Elias was greeted by a crowd of tall, graceful figures wearing robes that seemed made of moving starlight. They didn't speak Earth languages, yet they understood. Their leader, a regal elder with silver vines in his hair, dropped to one knee and spoke a single word with deep emotion: Chosen. Confused, Elias tried to explain. He wasn't special. He wasn't sent. He wasn't chosen. He was just a man who couldn't leave someone to die. But the more he denied it, the more they nodded, whispering in their own tongue, treating his refusal as a mark of divine humility. Siriva, as he now learned her name to be, stepped beside him, translating through glowing gestures and soft, resonant speech. She was no ordinary woman. She was a political and spiritual figure, a future leader, believed lost during a secret peace mission. Elias hadn't just saved a life. He had fulfilled an ancient prophecy that spoke of a being from the sky who would come in fire and storm, lifting the daughter of the stars from ruin and beginning a new age of unity. His act, though small in his own eyes, had meaning beyond anything he could have imagined. They led him through palaces of light, past waterfalls that floated upward, and gardens that sang when wind passed through them. Everywhere, people bowed. Children offered him small orbs that pulsed with warmth. Elders spoke his name like a sacred sound. Though Elias kept insisting he was no more than human, Siriva begged him to play along, at least for now. There were those who questioned his arrival, and if he didn't follow the traditions of the Chosen, things could turn dangerous. Elias, unsure, agreed not for his sake, but for hers. At night, he stood on a balcony beneath twin moons, thinking about how a single decision, a moment of compassion, had thrown him into a role he didn't want. But somewhere deep inside, he also felt a shift, a connection. These people believed in something greater than themselves. And now, for better or worse, they believed it was him. Yet unseen in the distance, far beyond the glowing cities and quiet celebrations, shadows stirred. Not everyone on the planet welcomed the return of the lost heir, and certainly not the one who brought her back. The celebration didn't last long. As the days passed and Elias tried to understand the strange world he had stumbled into, an undercurrent of tension began to grow, quiet at first, but unmistakable. Whispers followed him through the glowing corridors, not all of them in admiration. Some carried doubt, some even fear. While the people called him chosen, not everyone agreed he deserved that title. The Council of Voices, a powerful group that kept order through tradition and prophecy, remained silent when others praised him. Then, late one night, as the moons bathed the floating city in silver light, he expected another ceremony or more questions, but instead he found a circle of ancient figures seated in silence, their eyes cold and unreadable. At the center of the hall stood a narrow platform, ringed with symbols etched into glowing stone. Siriva stood beside it, tense but composed. She leaned close and whispered that the council had invoked the trial of stars, an ancient rite meant to test the worthiness of a would-be leader or savior. Elias blinked, trying to protest, but the words caught in his throat. The challenge was already accepted in his name. To refuse now would not only shame him, it would dishonor Siriva and risk war among the divided city-states. He had no choice. The first trial began without warning, a test of mind inside a chamber that bent reality. Elias found himself walking through memories that weren't his, speaking in riddles to figures from ancient history, answering questions that had no clear answers but somehow felt deeply personal. His human logic clashed with the spiritual language of the Larinthians, but his honesty and refusal to pretend impressed the judges, who watched from beyond the glass walls. The second trial was of body, and though Elias had no warrior's training, he faced simulated beasts formed from light and force, defending himself using only what he knew: momentum, leverage, and desperation. He didn't win through strength, but through observation and quick thinking, using the environment to outmaneuver the creatures. The crowd watching gasped each time he survived a blow, and by the end, even the guards who doubted him exchanged uncertain glances. The third and final trial was of spirit. They placed Elias in a chamber of silence and darkness, completely alone. No sounds, no time, no gravity, just him and his thoughts. For hours, or maybe days, he drifted in the void, facing guilt, fear, and questions that clawed at him. Was he really helping, or just pretending to be a hero? Was this all a lie built on coincidence? But then he remembered the woman he'd pulled from the wreck, remembered the look in her eyes when she first saw him, and the way the people sang when he stepped into their city, not because they were fooled, but because they were hoping. When he emerged from the chamber, pale and exhausted, the crowd fell silent. The council spoke. He had passed. Not because he was strong, or wise, or even truly the chosen, but because when tested, he did not give up. That, they said, was what their legends had always meant. Seriva smiled, a quiet, relieved smile that said more than words ever could. But far above the city, in a hidden observatory cloaked in shadow, a figure watched the trial's end and turned away in silence. To him, this was not a victory. It was the beginning of a dangerous shift. Elias had passed the tests, yes. But now, powerful enemies would rise, and not all of them would play by ancient rules. Elias had earned the people's trust, survived the trials, and stood beside Seriva as a symbol of change, but deep within the shining city, betrayal was already moving like a silent storm. The more Elias tried to learn about Larinthian history, the more things began to feel wrong. He studied their texts with Seriva's help, noticed odd gaps in their stories, inconsistencies in the prophecy that named him the Chosen, and phrases that felt too convenient, as if someone had edited fate to fit his arrival. Seriva began to question it too. She found old records, sealed scrolls hidden in crystal archives, showing past visitors from other worlds, one of them human-looking, centuries ago, none of whom had been called chosen but had vanished mysteriously. One evening, while Elias wandered a quiet library tower, he heard whispers behind the shelves. Priests of the council were speaking in hushed tones, their voices heavy with warning. He wasn't supposed to be the chosen, he was a tool, a spark meant to ignite a shift in power. The prophecy had been rewritten, twisted by the secretive inner circle that controlled belief like a weapon. When Elias confronted the council, they denied everything with smooth, practiced words, but he saw it in their eyes. They feared him now, feared that he was no longer their puppet. That night, assassins crept into the guest chambers. Elias barely escaped, his human instincts kicking in as he crawled through vents and dropped into the hidden paths Seriva had once shown him. She was waiting for him in the lower levels, already dressed in travel gear, her eyes hard with resolve. They couldn't stay in the city anymore. With the help of a few loyal ally scientists, scholars, and a group of young guards who believed the truth mattered more than tradition, they escaped in a stolen glider and fled across the clouds to the distant mountain cities, places untouched by the council's influence. Along the way, Elias saw more of the planet than he ever had, villages full of kind people who had been taught to worship him, but who instead asked real questions, curious about Earth, about humanity, about why he had chosen to help a stranger. Each time, Elias told them the truth. He didn't come to fulfill any prophecy. He simply saw someone in need and acted. And each time, their belief grew not in a legend, but in the idea that someone could choose to do good without being forced by fate. That terrified the old leaders more than any weapon. But time was running out. The council declared Elias a deceiver, accused Seriva of treason, and turned half the cities against them. The world stood on the edge of civil war. As shadows gathered and ancient machines of war stirred beneath the temples, Elias knew this had never been about prophecies or chosen ones. It was about who would control the future. And the only way to stop the coming conflict was not to destroy the belief in him, but to reshape it. Not as a god, not as a savior, but as a man who proved that humanity, flawed, stubborn, and endlessly curious, could choose to stand for something greater. The sky above the Larinthian capital had never looked so dark. Clouds of war gathered as ancient defense towers lit up across the horizon, their cores glowing with power not used in centuries. The Council of Voices, desperate to keep control, had twisted the prophecy into a weapon and declared open conflict against the outer cities, calling Elias a false idol and a threat to the sacred balance. But across the skies, among the mountain villages, the sea towers, and the floating schools of knowledge, something far more powerful was rising, a movement, sparked not by legend but by truth. Elias stood at the center of it, no longer hiding, no longer confused. He had accepted that he wasn't the chosen foretold in ancient songs, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the prophecy wasn't about a person with power, but a person who chose to do the right thing without being forced by destiny. He and Seriva traveled from city to city, broadcasted through ancient channels once. Thought lost, showing the people the hidden archives, the original texts, and most importantly, the truth about how he had found Seriva not in glory, but in desperation, risking his life for someone he didn't know. The message was simple but powerful. Greatness doesn't come from bloodlines or prophecies, it comes from choice. As word spread, more began to turn against the council's lies. Even within the capital, once loyal guards laid down their weapons, confused and tired of fighting for a belief that no longer made sense. Elias never picked up a sword, never fired a weapon, but he stood firm on the central platform of the Great Forum, where it had all started, surrounded by citizens from every corner of the world, speaking not as a savior but as a human being who believed that kindness mattered more than control. Suriva stood beside him, her voice calm but fierce, declaring a new path forward for her people, one based not on myth, but on unity and freedom of choice. The council fell, not with blood, but with silence, as their power crumbled under the weight of their own lies. In the days that followed, a new era began. The temples stayed, but they opened their doors to science and memory. The schools rewrote their histories to include doubt, growth, and change. And though many still whispered the word chosen when Elias passed, it no longer meant a figure of destiny. It meant someone who made a choice when it mattered. He stayed for a time, not as a ruler, but as a teacher, helping build bridges between Earth and Larinthia. And sometimes, when the stars were clear, he would sit with Suriva on the balcony of the rebuilt tower, watching ships pass through the sky, and remember how it all started, not with a prophecy, not with power, but with one decision to help a stranger in the dark.